Hello, welcome to a discussion on euthanasia, assisted suicide, and people with disabilities for June 13th, 2014. My name is Amy Hasbrook, and I am the director of Toujours Vivant-Not Dead Yet. We are a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending-of-life practices that tend to have a discriminatory effect on people with disabilities. There are several reasons that we oppose euthanasia and assisted suicide and similar practices. The first is that they are unnecessary because everyone now has the option to refuse medical treatment and to refuse to eat and drink and have palliative care, even sedation, until the point that their body naturally dies from whatever is making them sick. And if it is, a person has a terminal illness, that's what's supposed to happen. Secondly, we feel it's discriminatory because people without disabilities who express a desire to die, for example, a widow who a person who's just lost their partner or spouse, or a gay person who's been a victim of gay bashing, that person will receive suicide prevention services because, rightfully so, their desire to die is, something that can be treated. Well, people with disabilities feel exactly the same way. There is no rational reason that somebody should want to die just because they have a disability. Obviously, if you become disabled, you have to go through a period of grief and adjustment, but there's no reason to want to die. However, we are treated as though our desire to die is rational, and so we are encouraged, and when these practices become law, we are also helped to kill ourselves, and that we feel is discriminatory. Third, we believe that because people with disabilities don't have real choices in where and how they live because services aren't available to help to enable somebody to live in the community. People don't have home care services or modifications to their homes to make them wheelchair accessible, or people don't have access to public transportation, and the accessible transportation is, adapted transit is not sufficient. These are all reasons that prevent people from having the same choices non-disabled people have in controlling how they live. And we believe that as long as people with disabilities don't have those choices, then there is no real free choice to die. So that's another reason we believe it's, the whole idea of these laws is that you're supposed to have a free choice, but people with disabilities don't have a free choice. And finally, we don't believe, and evidence bears this out, that safeguards are effective in preventing people with disabilities or preventing people from dying who shouldn't be dying, who don't want to die. People talk about people who ask to die, but a lot of people who end up dying in these programs never asked to die. They had do not resuscitate orders put on their charts, or some person just decided that their life wasn't worth living and so gave them euthanasia, and this happens a lot. There's a lot of studies that show that. We don't feel that the safeguards are enough to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So the goal of our online discussions is for people with disabilities to have a chance to talk about this on our own terms. The media tends to portray this as, on the one side, people who support assisted suicide as progressive and liberal people, and on the other side, those who oppose it are conservative religious people. But in fact, the media ignores the fact that folks with disabilities are the most affected, because whether or not we have a terminal illness, it's nearly always people with disabilities who are given euthanasia or assisted suicide. And the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide is very different from other groups who oppose it. And yet our issues are not raised in the discussion generally, and that's a big problem. And also, there's no real chance for people with disabilities to talk among ourselves. And obviously, there's some people who don't agree with us, people with disabilities, and it would be helpful for us to air these issues in our community and to be able to discuss them. So that's why we're here, to have this conversation, to get the information out and to have the conversation. So there are a lot of ways to participate. Firstly is that you can participate via the Google Hangout on Air, and I send around the links to the page every week to those who give me their email address and want to be included on that list. And you can either watch the French discussion at 1 p.m. Eastern Time or the English discussion at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can also go to our website at TVNDY.ca, go to the events page and click on today's date, and you'll see the discussion. And you can write comments, which will be relayed to the YouTube page, and so I can look at those. And the other option is obviously on the YouTube page. You can find a discussion, and all you have to do is do a Google search on euthanasia and TVNDY or Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, and you'll find our discussions. So that should be relatively easy to find. So those are ways that you can participate. And if you see or hear anything on this discussion that interests you and you want more information, you can contact Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet at either on our website at tvndy.ca. You can also reach us at our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. You can follow me on Twitter, which is @TVNDY, or you can email me directly, and my email address is tigrlily61@gmail.com. Okay, on to today's topics. I attended a presentation regarding the steps that were pursued in Belgium that brought Belgium to where they are now, and I wanted to go over some of those, because in the next few months, Quebec is going to be implementing its euthanasia law, assuming the Supreme Court does not strike it down right away. And secondly, we're going to go back to our frequently asked questions file for part 11. We have a lot of frequently asked questions, so we have a lot of answers. So we'll go back to that. And finally, we have one news brief. So getting started on today's presentation on the steps toward euthanasia in Belgium. Dr. Georges Castor gave a presentation to about 100 people in Montreal on June 8th on the Belgium Euthanasia Program. The symposium was sponsored by Physicians Alliance Against Euthanasia and Living with Dignity. With the information that was provided by Dr. Castor and what we have observed, because I've been involved with this work for about 17 years, with all that information, we can have an idea of what the startup of the program might be like, or at least some things to look for. First of all, the government is going to issue regulations to implement the law, such as creating a definition for end of life, because in the law, that term, end of life, even though it's absolutely central to putting the law in place, and obviously one of the most important eligibility criteria, that term is not defined. And there are a lot of angles to defining that. First, if you're thinking of end of life, well, how long until the end of life? Is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? Is it going to be months? How long until the end of life? Secondly, if you're thinking about a person who's at the end of life, are you thinking about them in terms of whether their condition is being treated, or are you thinking about them in terms of, aside from the treatment they're having? So that could apply to someone with cancer, obviously, but it could also apply to somebody like me who uses a CPAP machine. And if I don't have my CPAP machine, I could have such low oxygen levels at night that I have a heart attack or die. My husband uses insulin. Does that apply to him? How about somebody on kidney dialysis? If they continue the dialysis, obviously that they're not at the end of life. But these kind of things that led the National Assembly in Quebec didn't take into account these kind of things. Also, they didn't take into account the fact that people are often misdiagnosed. So even if they do say, okay, well, it's 6 months or 9 months or 2 months or 3 weeks, people are so often misdiagnosed that it's not, even both misdiagnosed and given the wrong amount of time before they die, that those kind of numbers are fairly useless. So they haven't even thought about that. They just stuck in that term, end of life, and they don't, they hopefully will define it, or they're going to leave it up to the individual doctors, and that's pretty wacky. So that's going to happen. The second thing they'll do in writing their regulations is decide how euthanasia will be administered. When I was at the hearings last fall, when the pharmacists came up to talk, and the doctors and the nurses, nobody talked about how euthanasia would be given. If you want to go for the fastest and most painless method, shooting somebody in the head is probably it. But probably they won't have firing squads for killing people. But how are they going to do it? The drugs that are used in the United States for lethal injections have proved troublesome often, and often they don't work correctly, and it's hard to get those drugs now because countries that make them don't want to export them to places where assisted suicide or where death penalty is legal. So it's hard to get those drugs. What are they going to do? Are they going to use venom from some, box jellyfish in Australia? It's just they haven't even thought about. Well, they may have thought about it, but they certainly haven't discussed it. And one of the things to keep in mind in this process is that it's generally something that happens behind closed doors. It's not the what we're going to do, it's the how we're going to do it. And this is an opportunity to influence how the law looks in practice, and possibly to prevent some of the worst, some problems. But really, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, no matter what the law is, no matter what the regulations are, they're always violated, and that's the nature of a slippery slope. And that's what Dr. Castor said during his presentation. It's always violated. It's always one more step outside the box, and you keep going. Okay, so the government will is going to obviously have to launch a propaganda campaign, not only to educate the public, but also to promote the service, including they'll have to put information in hospitals, hospices, nursing homes, and community health centers. They're really going to push people to sign, to make advance directives, and when they do that, they push people to tick all the boxes that say, I don't want this care, I don't want that care, I don't want this care, I don't want that care, and that pushes you right to the end. And so then, it's important to note also that in the law, continuous palliative sedation, there are no eligibility criteria, so anybody can get it, and somebody can ask for it on your behalf. So if you are kind of out of it, and somebody decides, well, we'll just stop treatment for this person. There's nothing to stop that. There's nothing to prevent it. So those are other things to keep in mind when they are making up the regulations for this. The second part of their propaganda campaign is obviously going to tell people how to get the documents, how to fill them out. Again, it's going to be pushing people in the direction of refusing care. Push, push, push. And finally, information from websites in the public and public health and other government agencies, there's going to be information there. They're also going to have to start training doctors to do euthanasia. Probably they need to decide how they're going to do the euthanasia before they train the doctors to do it, but that's the next step. And at that point, or even before, doctors are going to have to decide both individually and collectively how they want to respond. Do they want to resist this, both as individuals and as a group, or are they going to just go along? Okay, based on the experience in the United States, it's very likely that groups that promote euthanasia, like Dying with Dignity, or the Farewell Foundation, or whatever group, will become much more active from now on in Quebec. First of all, they'll make a list of doctors willing to perform euthanasia, which is what they do in Oregon. So, and that's where this idea of doctor shopping comes from. So if your family doctor doesn't think that you are eligible because either you don't have a terminal illness or you haven't tried, some procedure that could ease your pain, or you are depressed and won't get counseling or won't take antidepressants, these groups will help you find a doctor that will, give you the service. And so even though you wouldn't be eligible, you'd probably end up having euthanasia. That's another very dangerous part about this program, is people do make decisions when they're in a bad way, and it's easy to do that. It's always possible to find a doctor who'll go along with you, and that's what these groups do. They help you find that doctor. It's also possible that these groups will provide services, and they do this elsewhere, to help you fill out the forms and, help you find the doctor. So they'll make the list, and then they'll help you connect to the doctor. And finally, it's also possible that they might set up a system where people from other parts of Canada could come and establish residency, so they would be eligible. And I have somebody here. Hi there. Somebody is wondering what we're doing. This is an online discussion of euthanasia and assisted suicide. I'm also going to go to my other window to see if anybody's asked a question. Okay, so let's see. So the next thing that is likely to happen in Quebec is this idea that these groups who promote euthanasia are probably, may very well set up, as happens in other places, the option for people to come from out of province, establish residency, and therefore become eligible for euthanasia in Quebec. That is, of course, unless the court overturns it. There will be no intervention by the criminal justice system, according to Dr. Castor, who's lived with this law for 12 years, except perhaps in the worst cases of abuse that are reported in the media. And what we know from Oregon and Washington is that there are very few cases reported in the media, even terrible cases, where people's, there's, for example, a guy named Thomas Middleton, who, a woman and her husband, who were kind of con artists and real estate people, took care of him a little bit and helped him do a few things, and all of a sudden he, gave them his house to sell, but they didn't sell it, and they rented it out, and they took the rent money, and then they basically stole the house and helped him get assisted suicide, so that they end up inheriting a lot of stuff from him. And this is the kind of abuse that, unless it comes into the papers, which this one kind of got a couple of articles here and there, but nothing major, nobody ever hears about, because people aren't going to say, oh, a lot of times families are very upset when a person dies, and especially if a person, was killed wrongfully, they don't necessarily want to go public with that. So oftentimes abuse cases don't make it into the media, and so they won't be pursued. And again, in Quebec, even where there is abuse, it doesn't go to the police. It goes to the Collège des Médecins, the medical supervisory board. Okay. The media, according to Dr. Castor, the first non-terminal patient, so person who wouldn't qualify under Belgium's law, was euthanized and filmed 3 weeks after the law was adopted, which is 1 week before the required 4-week waiting period. And so that fact, and the fact that the person did not have a terminal illness, made that person ineligible, and so made the euthanasia illegal. So the first illegal euthanasia took place 3 weeks after the law came into effect. And that's what happened in Belgium, and is probably going to happen here. And even if it doesn't happen right away, it happens, because we all think we're better than everybody else, but we're not. The media continues to use words like courage and respect to describe people who ask for euthanasia, because this is seen as a good thing, to kill yourself, I guess. Except for, if you have a disability, it's because people with disabilities are devalued, then killing yourself is seen as a good thing. But if you want to just live your life and get the services you need from the state and advocate for people to get the best services they need, you're not considered courageous, I guess. Or those words aren't applied to you. The Euthanasia Control Commission in Belgium is similar to the one that will be set up in Quebec, and it includes members. The one in Belgium includes members who pushed to have the euthanasia law passed, and the head of the commission often performs euthanasias, and he publicizes this quite openly, and euthanasias of people who don't qualify under their law. And also, the doctor's reports that go to that commission don't provide enough information to allow for the prosecution. So the commission is supposed to, if they find a problem, report that to the police, who will then prosecute or investigate and prosecute. But if the reports don't have enough information about what's happening, then there won't be a prosecution. So, okay. A couple of popular theories that have been disproved by the experience in Belgium. The first theory is that a law will help control euthanasia. That is not proved to be the case. It hasn't controlled the number of people who ask for it, and it certainly hasn't controlled the number of deaths of people who do not ask for euthanasia. And finally, most doctors won't perform euthanasia. That is, people always say, well, don't worry, it won't be a lot of doctors. Well, there, apparently, according to Dr. Castor, even though many doctors feel really constrained and coerced, and feel like the quality of the medical practice is suffered because of the euthanasia law, they nonetheless perform euthanasias because they're supposed to. Okay, so that is all for our report from Belgium and Dr. Georges Castor. Our next item on our subject list is frequently asked questions, part 11. And we made this file because obviously a lot of people have questions about these subjects, and the same questions keep coming up over and over again. So we decided to figure out, the answers that we give to these questions and write them down so everybody can have access to them. And you can find this on our website at tvndy.ca. The next question here is this: aren't we taking away autonomy and dignity by not allowing assisted suicide? Well, first of all, you don't have to die to have dignity, period. There's nothing undignified about having a disability. There's nothing undignified about needing or having personal, intimate care. It's just a state of mind. Some people, it's something that people get used to when they become disabled. Okay. Secondly, for assisted suicide to happen, another person, such as a doctor or a pharmacist, has to step in and take action on the person's behalf. That's why it's called assisted suicide. And where the health services are paid for by the government, such as here in Canada, that could also be seen as a state action, because the state is paying for somebody to step in and basically kill you, as in the case of euthanasia in Quebec, which was passed just now. Either way, when somebody steps in, it's not autonomous. You're not doing it. You're asking somebody to do it for you. You're saying, I don't want to take responsibility, or I don't want to do this, do it for me. And that's what's happening. That's not true autonomy. Secondly, the autonomy, you don't have autonomy because somebody has to deem you eligible, decide that you're eligible for assisted suicide. And that's also determined by another person according to government rules, and it's decided by a doctor. So usually a doctor, maybe more than one doctor. So there's another place where there's interference. It's not an individual autonomous act. So people are saying, oh, this is me, my body, my life, but they're asking all these other people to get involved. The diagnosis and treatment for the underlying illness is also not an independent process. It will be influenced by the doctor, and many doctors have a negative bias about disability and about the quality of life with disability, and this has been shown in many studies by Carol Gill, among others, but many studies show that doctors have a negative perception of the quality of life with disability. And also, when doctors make mistakes both in diagnosis and in prognosis, prognosis being how long you have to live, that will create send you in a certain direction that may not be the right direction. So there's a lot of interference, and it can be negative interference. It can be push you in the wrong direction. And it's certainly not, autonomous. My body, myself, my life. It's not that. And finally, in an interdependent society, the idea of autonomy is really not true. We all are dependent on the infrastructure, such as utilities, transportation, the agricultural, manufacturing, and shipping industries, and on healthcare and social services for our health and survival and well-being. So this idea of my body, myself, it's not real. We have families, we have people that depend on us and that we depend on. We don't live as autonomous beings. Why are we suddenly thinking that, our dying is magically going to be that? Because it's not. Okay? Aren't people who cannot commit suicide because they are physically incapable, aren't they denied of choices by making it a crime to help them? And this is what Sue Rodriguez argued when she brought her case in Canada in 1993. She said that she wanted to, was going to be too disabled to kill herself soon and wanted to have the option to die when she wanted to, even if she became too disabled to kill herself. And there are a lot of ways to respond to that. The first is that anyone can commit suicide. If somebody wants to be dead, they can be dead. If nothing else, a person can refuse medical treatment, food and water, and have comfort care and palliative sedation. Palliative sedation is when they put you make you unconscious and you don't experience what's happening to your body. Basically, you go to sleep. So I have friends who are very, very physically limited, but they know how, if they wanted to, they could commit suicide. And, once you know how to, use the equipment that you have or interact with your surroundings, you can figure out how to do it. But, like I said, most people don't actually want to be dead. In fact, more than 95% of suicide attempts fail. And mental health professionals believe that these are actually cries for help. And so the question is, should we be killing these people who are crying for help? Because if you're a person with a disability, you don't get the choice you don't get the option of having a failed attempt at suicide. If you're getting help, it's probably going to happen. So there's that safety net of a failed suicide attempt that's really a cry for help that doesn't exist for disabled people. And those events, people who work in the suicide field talk about the ambivalence of a desire, someone's desire to die, that they have mixed feelings about it. And so that's what often happens when somebody fails and does not die from a suicide attempt. So one thing to keep in mind is that the vast majority of people who publicly demand the right to euthanasia are, in fact, capable of suicide. If they want to be dead, they could be dead. But they don't need help to die. But these people, like Susan Griffiths, like Donald Lowe, all these people would actually be able to kill themselves, but that's not what they're asking for. They want help. And so, it makes me sort of wonder what they really want help with. But be that as it may. Finally, if somebody has to commit suicide before they become too disabled to do so, they will probably lose a few months at most, right? They'll say, well, I might be able to live a few more months, but if I really want to take be autonomous and do this myself, I have to do it now. And that means they'll lose a few months. But if we allow assisted suicide, experience tells us that many vulnerable people, like folks with intellectual disabilities and communication disabilities, will lose their whole lives, not just a few months. They'll lose their whole lives. And, because these people don't want, often people die who don't want and who haven't asked to die. So it's upsetting for some people to lose a few months, but it's a balance we have to take into consideration to weigh somebody losing a few months versus many other people losing their whole lives. Okay, and the final question for today, because we have lots more in our frequently asked questions file, is we euthanize our pets. What is the difference with assisted suicide? And before I answer that, I'm just going to make sure that we don't have any questions here. Nobody has asked a question here. That's too bad. Okay, gotta go back here and do that. Right. A lot of people ask us about this. They say, well, we treat our pets better than we treat our people because our pets, we can at least euthanize them. But let's look at what happens with those pets. About 4 million cats and dogs are euthanized each year, and that's mostly because, one, they're abandoned, so somebody just dumped them. They have personality or behavior problems, so a dog bit somebody, the dog is euthanized. Or a cat doesn't behave well with others, they get euthanized. They have costly medical conditions. The person is no longer able or willing to care for them, so if somebody moves in the new apartment, they can't have cats, or somebody dies and nobody will take the person's dog, all those reasons. The animal is old, incontinent, or just not very, has a tumor or something that isn't harmful but is ugly, and the person doesn't want the animal anymore, because they have a terminal illness, or even for no reason at all, for overpopulation. There are too many animals, not enough people to adopt them. And people don't want to spay and neuter their animals, which is ridiculous, but be that as it may. We have too many animals, and many animals are euthanized for all these reasons. And so, in fact, what we learn is that most people are euthanized for exactly the same reason that animals are euthanized. That, they are old and incontinent and unsightly, and they're losing their capacities, and often people are abandoned and nobody to take care of them, or they feel like they're a burden. All these reasons have nothing to do with what they say is the reason, which is pain. Pain can be managed almost every single case. So when you hear somebody say, oh, we treat our animals better than we treat our humans, think of those 4 million animals that are euthanized for all these different reasons, and think of how we treat those animals. Okay, that's the end of our frequently asked questions for today. Finally, we have a news brief, which is that Catherine Wynne won a new mandate for the Ontario Liberals yesterday. Ms. Wynne has already said that she is watching Quebec's euthanasia bill closely, and that she would like to see a similar bill adopted in Ontario. Obviously, she will have to... What? Sorry. She'll have to wait for the results of the Carter case and in the Supreme Court and other legal challenges that are likely to come up. I'm sorry, I sometimes get a little lost while I'm reading my notes. So that's something to keep in mind, and I think that other people in other parts of Canada can learn some important lessons from our experience in Quebec, and we have developed a lot of really good materials that can be useful elsewhere in educating people about what these laws really mean and what will really happen. So, how to get in touch with us? First of all, if you want to watch other discussions that I've done, we have on our website, you can look at the calendar, events calendar, and choose your date between last September and now. We have old online discussions available to watch. If, for some reason you are having trouble sleeping and you need to hear something really distracting, or want to torture somebody, you could do that. Also, it's easy to get in touch with us. There are lots of different ways. You can email me at tigrlily61@gmail.com. You can also visit our website, which is tvndy.ca. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. It's all written on the screen there. You can you can follow us on Twitter, which is at @TVNDY, and obviously those are the 4 ways to be in touch with us: the website, the Facebook page, Twitter, and email me directly. Also listening to the former discussions. This online discussion would work a lot better if there were actually people talking and posing questions. So, for example, the person who came on earlier hasn't asked any questions, but that's okay. But please spread the word to people you know that we have these discussions every Friday afternoon. The French discussion is at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., and the English discussion is at 3 p.m. And I made it at this time because I want to be able to reach both people on the West Coast of North America and people in Europe. So it's not too late for people in Europe and not too early for people on the West Coast, and it's also possible for people in Australia and New Zealand to participate, though it's very early Saturday morning for them. Trying to make this accessible to as many people as possible. So it's not ideal for everybody the time, but you can, if you can't make it at the time, you can watch and leave comments. So I appreciate your viewing, and please feel free to join us next week when we will have another discussion online about assisted suicide, euthanasia, and people with disabilities. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good week. Take care. Goodbye.